The sun hung low over the New Mexico plains, painting the horizon in copper and dust. Ethan Cole stood by his broken fence, sweat on his brow and the ache of solitude deep in his bones. His ranch was miles from the nearest town, surrounded by dry earth and silence that had grown too heavy over the years. He was mending wire, his hands calloused, when the wind carried an unfamiliar sound, the uneven rhythm of hoofsteps. Lifting his head, he saw her emerge through the orange haze of evening, tall, broad-shouldered, a figure both human and untamed. She led a wounded horse beside her, the animal limping, her hand steady on its neck. The sight froze him where he stood. She was unlike any woman he'd seen before. Taller than most men, her long black hair braided with copper beads that caught the dying light. Her clothes were rough buckskin, torn and travel-stained, and her gaze sharp as flint. She stopped a few yards from his fence, saying nothing. Ethan raised a cautious hand. "You're a long way from your people," he said. Her dark eyes flicked toward him, unreadable. When she spoke, her voice was low, like the murmur of thunder beyond the hills. "Water," she said simply, not a plea. A statement. Ethan nodded toward the well by the barn and watched her lead her horse there, each step slow, deliberate, proud. He poured a bucket for the horse, another for her. She drank in silence, eyes never leaving his. There was a gravity to her presence that made the world smaller, quieter. When she finally spoke again, she said her name, Lona. The syllables rolled through the air like something sacred. Ethan introduced himself, awkward under her gaze. "Ethan Cole," he muttered. "Rancher." She nodded once, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. Her horse's leg was bleeding, an old wound reopened by the trail. Without thinking, Ethan motioned toward his barn. "I've got bandages and salve," he said. "You can tend to him there." Lona hesitated, then followed. Inside the barn, the scent of hay and horse filled the dim light. Ethan handed her the supplies, but she shook her head. "You help," she said firmly. Together, they cleaned the gash, her strong hands steady as stone. Up close, he saw the faint scars on her forearms, reminders of battles long past. She didn't flinch, didn't ask for pity. The only sound was their breathing and the quiet rustle of the horse. When they finished, Lona glanced around, taking in his modest tools, his patched walls, the signs of a man who lived alone. "You have no woman," she said plainly. Ethan blinked, startled. "No," he answered. "Not anymore." Her eyes softened, just slightly. Night came fast, spilling over the plains like ink. Ethan lit a lantern and offered her food. Beans, bread, and coffee brewed black and bitter. She ate slowly, sitting across from him by the fire. For a while, neither spoke. Outside, coyotes sang to the moon, and the old boards of the ranch creaked with the cooling air. "You're far from home," Ethan said at last. Lona looked toward the flames. "My home was taken," she replied. "Now I walk where the wind leads." There was no sorrow in her voice, only truth. Ethan didn't press her. He'd learned long ago that some stories weren't meant to be pried open. He watched her as she stared into the firelight, her face calm but unreadable. Strength and loneliness lived side by side in her eyes. She was a woman of the land, carved by it, not merely surviving but belonging to it. When he rose to clear the dishes, she surprised him by speaking again. "Why help me?" she asked. He paused, hand on the tin cup. "Because you looked like you needed it," he said softly. "And because nobody else would." She nodded once, as if testing his words against her own spirit. Most men would have turned away. Ethan gave a small smile. "I'm not most men." Later, when the wind picked up, he offered her his old bunk in the barn. "It's warm there," he said. "The nights can get mean." She looked at him for a long moment, then replied, "I sleep near my horse." It wasn't defiance. It was her way. Ethan understood. He handed her an extra blanket without argument. As he turned to leave, she said quietly, "You are kind." The words were simple, yet they struck deeper than any compliment he'd ever known. "Just decent," he murmured. "World could use more of that." That night, he lay awake in his cabin, staring at the low ceiling beams while the fire cracked faintly in the stove. Outside, the wind howled through the cottonwoods, and he could hear the faint rhythm of the horse shifting in the barn, and her voice, low and steady, humming a song he didn't recognize. Something ancient, older than the desert itself. He closed his eyes and listened. He didn't know it yet, but that song would return to him in dreams. The beginning of something neither of them could name. Born from dust, silence, and an act of simple kindness, winter melted slow that year, the snow giving way to red mud and green shoots along the river. Ethan's ranch had always felt empty, a place of work, not warmth, but Lona's presence changed the air itself. She rose before dawn, her shadow long against the horizon, and worked beside him with quiet strength. Together they mended fences, her hands steady as she drove posts into the stubborn earth. She spoke little, yet every word she chose mattered. When she laughed, rare as spring rain, it startled him. He didn't realize how much he'd missed the sound of joy until he heard it from her lips. In those small, wordless days, the rhythm of their lives began to fall into place, like the turning of seasons. The townfolk didn't understand. To them she was an oddity, a tall, proud Apache woman who towered over most men, walking beside the quiet rancher who never raised his voice. They whispered when they rode into town for supplies, mothers pulling children close, men tipping hats with wary curiosity. Ethan heard it all and ignored it. "Let 'em talk," he told her. Once as they hitched the wagon, she only smiled faintly. "They see what they fear," she said, "not what is true." He nodded, realizing that her calm came from a lifetime of being looked at and misunderstood. He respected that strength. It wasn't just in her size or her skill, it was in the way she carried herself. Unbroken by the world's cruelty, as spring edged into summer, they worked side by side, sweat and dust binding them more tightly than words could. Lona learned to handle cattle, and Ethan learned to listen, really listen. She taught him the Apache names for stars, the meanings behind the winds. At night, they sat by the fire while she traced constellations in the air, her voice soft as wind through sage. Sometimes she would fall silent mid-story, eyes distant, remembering her lost home. Ethan didn't ask questions. He simply listened, offering his presence like a steady hand in the dark. Little by little, she began to trust him, not because he demanded it, but because he never asked her to be anything but herself. Then came the storm, fierce, sudden, and unrelenting. The clouds rolled in from the west like a wall of smoke, swallowing the sun. Wind ripped through the valley, tearing shingles and fence posts loose. Ethan ran to the barn, shouting over the thunder, "We need to tie the roof beams!" Lona was already there, fighting the storm as if it were a living thing. Rain soaked her hair, her hands gripping the ropes with iron strength. When a beam collapsed, pinning Ethan's leg, she didn't hesitate. With a cry that cut through the thunder, she lifted it, muscles straining, eyes blazing, and pulled him free. "Move!" she shouted, dragging him toward safety as the barn gave way behind them. When the storm passed, the land was half gone. Fences scattered, roof torn open, the barn in ruin. But they were alive. Ethan sat against a fallen post, breath ragged, mud streaked across his face. Lona knelt beside him, pressing her large, calloused hand to his shoulder. "You will heal," she said, as if willing it into truth. He looked up at her, eyes shining through the grit. "You saved me." She shook her head slowly. "You saved me first." The words hung between them like a prayer, unspoken yet eternal. In that broken moment, surrounded by ruin, he realized he didn't just need her, he loved her. The weeks after the storm tested them both. Together they rebuilt what the wind had taken. Every plank nailed, every post raised became a shared vow, not of ownership, but of belonging. When his leg healed, Ethan found himself watching her differently, not in awe but in quiet gratitude. She wasn't fragile, but she wasn't untouchable either. One night, as they stood beneath a sky washed clean by rain, he took her hand. Her fingers dwarfed his, strong yet trembling. "You could have left," he whispered. "Why stay?" She met his gaze, the moonlight soft on her face. "Because I found peace here," she said. And peace is rarer than gold. By the time the wildflowers bloomed, the valley had changed. So had they. Travelers passing through still whispered about the rancher and the giant Apache woman who worked beside him, but now their tones carried wonder instead of mockery. Ethan and Lona didn't care for gossip. They cared for mornings that began with coffee and laughter, for nights filled with music and silence shared like prayer. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Ethan carved their initials into the barn door. When Lona saw, she touched the rough letters, smiling softly. "This is home now," she said. He nodded. Hours. Years later, folks still told stories about them, the quiet rancher and the woman with the strength of 10 men and the gentleness of one. Some called it legend, others a love story. But for Ethan and Lona, it was simply life. Two souls who had found each other on the edge of the world and decided not to let go. Under the wide, eternal sky of New Mexico, they learned that love doesn't ask to be understood. It just grows, steady as the land, fierce as the wind, and gentle as the hands that build it.